It was just another ordinary day at the bustling city bank where customers lined up and the hum of ringing phones filled the air. But for Janet, it was the beginning of an experience that would change everything. Janet had been working at the bank for several years, quietly moving through her daily tasks, always focused on her work, never seeking attention or recognition. She was one of the many employees who blended into the background. But what no one knew, not even her colleagues, was that Janet was not just an ordinary bank employee. She was the CEO of the entire company, holding the reins of a multi-million-dollar empire. It all started when the bank's manager, Greg Thompson, known for his brash attitude and sharp tongue, walked into the office that day with an air of superiority. Greg had been running the branch for several years, and his arrogance had earned him a reputation. He believed himself to be the backbone of the company, always looking down on others he deemed lesser. "Janet, where are those reports I asked for?" Greg snapped as he strode past her desk. His tone was sharp, impatient. "You always seem to be dragging your feet on the simplest tasks. Honestly, sometimes I wonder why you even work here. You're useless." The words stung, but Janet did not react. She simply nodded, kept her head down, and returned to the task at hand, her fingers typing away. She knew better than to challenge Greg. He was a man who thought of himself as irreplaceable, and no one in the office dared to cross him. What Greg didn't know, however, was that Janet had spent the last several years rising through the ranks, building her skills and business acumen, until she had become the driving force behind the company's success. But she had kept her true position a secret. The bank had been struggling recently, and Greg had made it clear that he believed the problems stemmed from the lack of leadership within the lower ranks. What he didn't realize was that the real leader, the one who could turn everything around, was sitting right under his nose: Janet. As Janet continued with her work, her mind began to wander. She remembered the day she had received the call that had changed her life. The call had come from the company's founder, a man she had admired from afar. He had offered her the position of CEO, entrusting her with the future of the entire corporation. It was a position she had never expected, and yet she had accepted it without hesitation. "I need you to take the reins," he had told her. "I've seen your potential, Janet. You are the future of this company." It had been a whirlwind since then. Janet had learned how to navigate the complex world of corporate management, all while keeping her true identity hidden from everyone around her. She had taken the helm in secret, ensuring that every decision made was in the best interest of the company, and in doing so, had secured the company's growth and prosperity. Back in the present, Greg stood over her desk, waiting for a response. His smug expression made it clear that he expected an apology, or at the very least a meek acceptance of his criticism. But Janet said nothing. She simply rose from her chair, walked past him, and made her way toward the elevator. Greg stood there, confused, watching her leave. He had no idea where she was going, and frankly, he didn't care. He had more important things to worry about. But as the elevator doors closed, a subtle shift began to happen within Janet. She was no longer just a worker bee in the bank's hive. She was about to reveal the truth. What Greg didn't realize was that this was no ordinary day for Janet. Today, she wasn't going to let his words slide. Today, she was going to remind him of who truly held the power. As the elevator descended, Janet's phone buzzed. It was a message from the board of directors, a group she had come to know well in her time as CEO. "It's time," the message read. "We are ready." Janet took a deep breath. She knew that the moment had finally come. No more hiding. No more pretending to be just another employee. It was time to take her place as the true leader of the company. When the elevator doors opened, Janet stepped out with a newfound sense of purpose. She made her way to the conference room, where Greg was preparing for the day's meeting. He was busy reviewing some papers, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Janet entered the room, her footsteps steady and determined. Greg looked up, his surprise evident as he saw her standing there, no longer the shy, quiet employee he had so easily dismissed. He opened his mouth to speak, but Janet held up a hand, silencing him. "I think it's time you learned a few things, Greg," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You've been underestimating people, thinking you're the one in control. But today you're going to see just how wrong you are." Greg's face twisted with confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tinged with annoyance. Janet smiled, the corners of her lips curling in a way that sent a chill down his spine. "I'm not just the assistant you think I am," she said slowly. "I'm not the useless employee you believe me to be. In fact, I am the one who has been running this company, and now you're about to find out just how much you've been blind to." Greg's expression faltered. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone wavering. "You're just the assistant, you don't—" "I'm the CEO," Janet interrupted, her words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. For a long moment, there was silence in the room. Greg's eyes widened in shock as he tried to process what she had just said. "What?" he finally managed to stammer. Janet stepped forward, her posture tall and confident now. "I am the CEO. This whole company has been under my leadership for the past year. And you, Greg, have been nothing more than a puppet, blind to the true power behind this bank." Greg's face went pale and he stumbled backward, his mind racing to piece together the truth. The confident, quiet woman he had belittled for so long was now standing before him, revealing a truth that shattered everything he had believed. But that wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning. The next few moments would determine everything. Would Greg accept the reality of his situation? Or would he fight against the truth, trying to hold on to the power he had so arrogantly claimed? One thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Greg stumbled back a step, his mind racing, as Janet's words sank in. He had always been so sure of himself, so certain that his position as manager made him untouchable. The idea that this quiet, unassuming woman, who had always been just another face in the office, was the true power behind the company, was nearly impossible for him to grasp. Janet watched him carefully, her expression calm but piercing. She could see the wheels turning in his mind as he processed the revelation. But what did she expect him to do? Challenge her? Deny the truth? She knew better than to think he would accept it immediately. Greg Thompson had never been the type of man to admit fault, especially when it was so glaringly obvious. "I'm the CEO," she repeated, her voice unwavering. "I've been running this company from behind the scenes, while you've been playing the role of manager. And frankly, you've done a terrible job." Greg's lips twitched, and for a moment Janet saw a flicker of something like anger in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by the facade of professionalism he was known for. "You're lying," he muttered, almost too quietly. "There's no way you could be the CEO. I would have known." "Oh, you would have?" Janet raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "I thought you were too busy managing to notice what was happening around you. You've been more concerned with maintaining your little bubble of control than seeing the bigger picture." Greg opened his mouth to argue, but Janet held up a hand, stopping him. "You're right about one thing," she continued, her voice colder now. "You should have known. And that's what makes this so much more interesting. You've been too focused on your own ego to pay attention to the very people who actually make things happen." For a moment, there was silence between them. Greg's eyes were narrowed in disbelief, but the wheels in his head were turning faster, now trying to catch up to the information Janet had just dropped on him. She could see the realization starting to hit him, the confusion morphing into frustration. "You've been here all this time pretending to be in charge," Janet said, her tone sharp. "But let me tell you something, Greg. You're just a cog in a machine, and it's about time someone showed you who's actually been pulling the strings." Greg's face reddened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He opened his mouth again, but this time his words were laced with venom. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over? You think you can make me look like a fool in front of everyone?" Janet's eyes flashed with something cold, something that made Greg take a step back. She had seen his type before, men like him who thought they were invincible, who believed that their position gave them the right to belittle others. But what they didn't realize was that the real power didn't come from titles or positions. It came from the ability to shape the future, to make decisions that would impact everyone, not just yourself. I'm not here to make you look like a fool, Janet said, her voice low and controlled. You're already doing that on your own. I'm here to make sure you understand one simple thing. I am the one in charge now. Greg opened his mouth to argue again, but this time he was interrupted by a knock at the door. The sudden sound made both of them turn, and Greg's face twisted in annoyance. He quickly smoothed his expression, clearing his throat before calling, "Out." "Come in." The door opened, and a young woman entered the room, holding a stack of papers in her hands. Her eyes flicked nervously between Greg and Janet, but she didn't say anything. She was one of the junior employees, someone who had been with the bank for only a few months, but she had quickly gained a reputation for being efficient and hard-working. Janet glanced at her, and the young woman seemed to recognize the tension in the room immediately. She shifted her weight uneasily from one foot to the other but didn't say anything, waiting for Greg to speak. "What is it?" Greg barked, his irritation clear. The young woman hesitated, then stepped forward, placing the stack of papers on the desk in front of him. "These are the reports for the meeting later today," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg grunted in acknowledgement, but his eyes kept flicking back to Janet, who stood silently across from him. Janet could feel the shift in the air, Greg's uncertainty, his frustration, the unease that had settled over the room. He no longer had the control he thought he did, and with each passing second, Janet felt more empowered. "Thank you," Greg muttered, dismissing the young woman with a wave of his hand. She left as quickly as she came, closing the door behind her. As the room fell silent once again, Greg turned his attention back to Janet. His expression was no longer one of confidence, but of calculation. He was trying to figure out his next move, trying to find a way to regain control of the situation. "You can't just walk in here and take over," Greg said, his voice more measured now, though still tinged with defiance. "There are people in this company who won't stand for it. You think you can just walk away from everything you've worked for?" Janet tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not walking away, Greg. I'm stepping up. I've been stepping up for a long time now. While you've been content with your little corner of the world, it's time for things to change." Greg's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Janet wondered if he would lash out, but he didn't. Instead, he took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. "You can't do this," he said, his voice quiet but insistent. "There are rules. There are processes. You can't just waltz in and think you can run things." Janet took a step closer, her presence overwhelming. "The rules are changing, Greg," she said, her voice cool. "And you have a choice to make. You can either accept the fact that I'm in charge or you can try to fight me. But I'm not going anywhere. I am the future of this company." Greg's face twisted with a mix of disbelief and anger, but he said nothing more. The tension between them was thick, almost tangible, and Janet could feel it wrapping around her like a storm cloud waiting to burst. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear. She wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever.